sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's become something of a trite and overused saying, but sometimes there's just nothing else you could say that would sum up the stories of some rock musicians. The man we will look at today was another nuclear fireball of energy, speed, and technicality on the fretboard, while mirroring some of those things in his personal life. He was restless, yet positive. He lived a life of bacchanal excess, but his friends would tell you he'd give you the shirt off his back without a second's hesitation. He brought two legendary bands back from the brink of destruction before leaving them behind, constantly searching for his own musical path. And that path could only lead in one, unfortunately, predictable direction. He is the legendary Tommy Bolin, and he's our sixth subject, next on Forgotten Fretmasters. Welcome once again to Forgotten Fretmasters, where we examine guitarists or musicians who, for one reason or another, might not have been as commercially successful as, had the longevity of, or left us sooner than some of the other guys who often end up on all the top 10 lists. Today we're revisiting the life and all too short career of American guitarist Tommy Bolin. Despite passing away way too young, Tommy fit a monstrous amount of music into his few years on this earth. It's going to be a crazy ride, but remember, if you like stories like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more rock documentaries just like this, and hit the like button below to let YouTube know that you think other rock fans would like to see this video. And now, without further ado, let's take a look at Tommy Bolin. Thomas Richard Bolin was born on August 1st, 1951 in Sioux City, Iowa in the USA. Bolin's parents, Rich and Barbara, were extremely supportive of young Tommy, with his father saying that he didn't care what Tommy wanted to be, he just wanted him to strive towards being the best at whatever that was. Tommy showed very early interest in music and quickly developed massive talent on any instrument that he could get his hands on. He would develop proficiency on drums, piano, and finally receive his first guitar at the age of 10. Not surprisingly, the music gene was strong in Tommy's family. His maternal grandfather, Abe Joseph, was a Lebanese recording artist, with the Bolin estate still holding on to his tapes in their vault. It wouldn't be long before Tommy's talent and hard work paid off, and he quickly became a sought-after axeman in local bands. He joined his first band, the Miserloos, but was quickly drafted into a more professional act called Denny and the Triumphs at the young age of 13, illustrating how good Bolin already was on the guitar. In these early bands, Tommy was known to play a Moss-Wright surf guitar. This band would eventually morph into A Patch of Blue, and a recording of two shows that the band played in Correctionville and Sioux City, Iowa exists as A Patch of Blue Live and was released in 1999. Tommy would spend about a year and a half in the band before being fired because he refused to turn his guitar down as he'd cranked it to upstage the rest of the band. He finally did a stint with a band called The Chateau, which already had another lead guitarist, and so Tommy played mostly keyboards. During this period, he'd upgraded to a Gretsch Country Gentleman with a blue custom amplifier. But if you're unfamiliar with American geography, let me give you a quick lesson. Iowa is about as far away from everything as you can get. Landlocked on all sides and planted firmly in the Midwest, Tommy was feeling both figuratively and literally boxed in by his current situation. Even though his early bands were good, with Patch of Blue even getting inducted into the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Bolin knew he'd get nowhere in Sioux City, so he packed his bags and told his parents that he was moving to the then growing music hotbed of Denver, Colorado. Bob Ellison, lead vocalist of The Chateau, was none too pleased about Tommy's unannounced exit. Musician David Napier from the band remembered, "The first time I heard of that Bolin kid was when he didn't show for a gig. I got a call from Ellison to fill in. Boy, was Bob pissed." Once in Denver, the fates aligned for Tommy quickly, and he heard music coming from a basement as a band called Crosstown Bus was rehearsing. He boldly asked if he could jam with the band, and Tommy would start a long-time writing collaboration with vocalist Jeff Cook. Tommy and Jeff would split off to form a new project called American Standard, named after the toilet brand, of course, but this was short-lived. Bolin was constantly moving, switching between projects, and never tying himself down to a project for too long. His restless nature saw him getting around in the Colorado music scene, and before long, Tommy found himself backing Lonnie Mack, perhaps a future forgotten Fretmaster himself, and struck up a friendship with keyboardist John Farris, and the two would then move to Boulder, Colorado. This would mark the beginning of Tommy's first taste of the big time. The pair would hook up with two musicians from Boulder who'd been in a band called Brown Sugar named Candy and David Givens, a husband and wife team. They would pull together to form Ethereal Zephyr. The band would become known as a powerful blues and rock combo, with Candy's singular Janis Joplin-inspired vocals intertwining with Tommy Bolin's virtuosic guitar work. After shortening their name to Zephyr, they would release two albums with Tommy, the self-titled debut followed by Going Back to Colorado. Their local stardom catapulted the band into opening gigs for massive acts like Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. Tommy was known to use a Gibson SG at this time to, quote, get that sound, but of course Tommy couldn't be held in a stable for too long, and his interest in jazz rock fusion pulled him in a completely different direction. He took Zephyr's current drummer Bobby Berge in May of 1971 to form the band Energy, and even though a lot of live recordings exist of this period in Tommy's career, the band wasn't able to secure a record deal. Despite this, it clearly was a formative time in Tommy's career, as he also sang in the band and was its clear frontman for the first time. But Energy's inability to take off gave a brief pause to Tommy, and after the band's demise, he would take about 10 months off of music, writing songs and licking his wounds. He would reemerge in mid-1972, and he ended up recording on several songs from Billy Cobham's first solo LP, formerly of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This album featured more jazz fusion, and Tommy was influenced by the work of Jeff Beck, who had been transmogrifying rock, blues, and jazz styles in his then-current work. This album would become important to Tommy's future, but more on that later. During this period, Tommy was known to use the legendary Gibson EMS 1235 double neck guitar. The next chapter in Tommy's journey would showcase his ability to breathe new life into bands that previously had been on the rocks. Tommy tells the story that several musicians that he had been working with in mid-1973 had left to join Joe Walsh's touring band. The way Tommy put it, he thought, quote, Joe might have felt a little guilty, unquote, about stealing his band. But whatever the case, Joe called his old bandmate, James Gang leader and drummer Jim Fox, who had just parted ways with their singer and guitarist after two lackluster albums, to recommend that they draft Tommy into the band. A single jam session was all they needed to see his talent. James Gang would then add lead singer Roy Kenner and go on to record two albums, 1973's Bang and 1974's Miami. Bolin's backing vocals and occasional lead vocals, as well as his writing contributions, are all over both albums. Most music reviewers would call the album somewhat a return to form for James Gang, and their best since the two that they had released with Walsh several years prior. Despite a lack of radio hits, the albums stand up as notable guitar works and a crucial part of Bolin's career, but once again, Tommy Bolin and his never-ending quest for more saw him suddenly leave the band after Miami's release. Incidentally, when Tommy joined James Gang, his roadie Dave Brown came up with two Fender Stratocasters with transplanted Telecaster necks, and Tommy used a Sunburst and an Olympic White model of these guitars. After the James Gang, Tommy would do some session work, notably with the Canadian band Moxie as lead guitarist on 6 songs from their debut album. Eventually, Tommy would sign a record deal with Nemperor Records as a solo artist, and he would begin recording his first album with a slew of guest artists, including David Foster, David Sanborn, Jan Hammer, Jeff Porcaro, Glenn Hughes, and Phil Collins. But as he was finishing this album, he got a phone call. Apparently, then lead singer of Deep Purple and future Whitesnake leader David Coverdale had heard Tommy's work on Billy Cobham's album and suggested that he replace Ritchie Blackmore in the band after he left to form Rainbow. Although Tommy desperately wanted a solo career of his own, the money and status of playing with a huge act like Deep Purple was simply too much to pass up. Purple would hurriedly jump into the studio in Munich to record the 1975 LP, Come Taste the Band. And once again, most music reviewers were surprised at the quality of the album and, of course, of Tommy's playing. Although most hardcore Purple fans view it as an aberration in their catalog, it stands as a decent album with a different direction. Unfortunately, Bolin's very different style from Blackmore's, combined with his and bassist Glenn Hughes' substance abuse problems, led to unhappy Purple fans who consistently called for Blackmore, and the band was known to be very up and down during this period. Before one show, Tommy had taken morphine and passed out on his arm for 8 hours, and when he woke up, his right hand wouldn't work right. So he could only play bar chords and rhythm, and keyboardist John Lord had to play the solo parts. Tommy's substance abuse had begun to reach new levels. Of course, this was the show that the record company had recorded for Purple's latest live release, and despite reservations from the band, it would be released as Last Concert in Japan. During his time with Purple, he used his roadie Dave Brown's Gibson Les Paul Standard with an American flag pickguard to try to visually stand apart from the British Blackmore. But you might be wondering, what happened to that solo album that Tommy had been working on? Well, it did get finished and released at the same time that Bolin had been playing in Deep Purple, and because he was unable to support the album on its own merits, it unfortunately underperformed despite very high praise from critics. The album is truly a lost wonder of the 1970s, blending tons of different styles like rock, jazz, blues, reggae, Latin music, and even bordering on proto-metal at times. It amply shows off Tommy's vast musical vocabulary and seamlessly weaves his ability to merge these styles into authentic, interesting songs. Tommy's hardcore fans know that this was probably one of the greatest albums of the decade, but it faded into obscurity. He was also known to add a more traditional Stratocaster at this time, but due to the smaller headstock size, this is believed to be a pre-CBS Fender model. But before I go on, let's all try to bring the album teaser back from the dead by going onto our streaming services like Apple Music or Spotify, pulling this album up, and giving it a fresh listen. Let's make Tommy trend again. He deserves a resurgence in the 21st century, and after all, it probably would take about this long for all of us to catch up to his musical style anyway, right? Anyway, Tommy did try to squeeze in a few shows in April of '76 to offer late support to the album, but this would end ignominiously when he nearly fell off the stage in New York City due to intoxication of multiple substances, and he would be dropped by Emperor Records. Tommy would quickly form a backing band after the Deep Purple debacle, wanting to waste no more time in growing his solo career to where he felt that it deserved to be. Tommy's band, while a rotating cast of characters, often featured musicians on many different instruments. As Tommy once said that he didn't really listen to guitarists or drummers, he was drawn to great players of any instrument. Tommy would sign a new deal with CBS Records in 1976 and hurriedly convened to record his second solo album, which would become Private Eyes, in June. He would regularly add an Ibanez Explorer to his ever-expanding gear list during this period. The album was released in September of 1976, and once again, Tommy became a darling of the critics, who lauded the album for its eclectic mix of genres and interesting songs. The tour would begin in earnest, with Tommy being set up to open for many major acts like Jeff Beck and Peter Frampton. Playing bass for Frampton was Stanley Sheldon, who had been in Bolin's failed early band Energy. Sheldon remembers that Tommy was upset and moody, both happy that Sheldon had found success with Frampton, but frustrated that he himself was not the headliner. Sheldon said, quote, "Tommy was crying. I remember that he was just so upset that he wasn't the headliner. I think it was really getting to him at that point. I mean, he was happy for me, but he was just a little frustrated, and definitely way too high," unquote. But finally starting to gain some traction as his own man, he played memorable shows throughout the tour and was photographed on December 3rd, 1976, backstage sitting with one of his influences, Jeff Beck. Earlier in the day before the show, Tommy had been interviewed by John Marlowe of the Miami News, who told him at the close of the interview to, quote, "take care of yourself," to which Tommy replied, quote, "I've been taking care of myself my whole life. Don't worry about me. I'm going to be around for a long time." But hours later, Tommy Bolin would be dead. He was only 25 years old. Bolin's bass player at the time, Jimmy Haslip, recounted the night that Tommy passed away. He said that the last thing he told him was to, quote, "be careful." He went on to say, quote, "When I left, I heard that there was an entourage of people that ended up in Tommy's hotel room and there was some partying going on, and that's when, from what I understand, there was a major problem. Tommy passed out, and basically his body was being deprived of oxygen for some reason. He was turning blue. Supposedly, right away somebody wanted to call 911, but this guy who was sent out to be Tommy's babysitter put a halt to that and said, 'I'll take care of him.' The guy was an ex-Marine drill sergeant. He probably had skills in saving people's lives, the skills that a paramedic might know. If you bring in an ambulance with paramedics, that's going to bring a lot of publicity. So maybe he was trying to protect Tommy from any kind of strange publicity like that, trying to revive him on his own. They supposedly threw him in the tub and started pouring cold water over him to try to bring him back into consciousness. From what I understood, his color came back and he was breathing fairly normally. Then they got him into bed and he started turning blue again. And I think at that point, they did call 911, but by then it was too late, and when the paramedics got there, they could not bring Tommy back. Brown said that Tommy had become semi-conscious and told him he didn't want to go to the hospital, so they put him to bed, but he never woke up the next morning. It was found that Tommy had died of an accidental heroin overdose, and alcohol, cocaine, and barbiturates were also found in his system. Tommy lived his life at such breakneck speed, there was never time to stop and look back at his career while he was still alive. Once a replacement for legends like Joe Walsh and Ritchie Blackmore, soon to be a legend in his own right, taken away from us way too soon. Unfortunately for many, Tommy has become a footnote in the pantheon of guitarists. Doomed to never gain traction in a cloistering band like James Gang or Deep Purple, and when he finally got a chance to make a name for himself, his lifestyle finally caught up to him. That, of course, does not detract from the fact that Tommy Bolin possessed a kind and gentle soul. He celebrated good music and good players. He lifted them up, gave them a voice, and added them to the tapestry of his musical learning. He had the look, he had the swagger, he had the chops. He had a restless and hungry musical appetite, and he never wanted to get stale or stand still or make the same music twice. To think what Tommy could have accomplished with even a few more years is agonizing, and that we will never know in what direction his musical journey would have taken him and us. So close to gaining the notoriety with his own name that he so desperately sought, he is a testament to the evils of addiction and the dangers of living life without guardrails. But that is another episode of Forgotten Fretmasters. Please remember to subscribe to the channel to see all of our future work, and be sure to drop a comment or a like to let me know what you thought of Tommy as an artist. Maybe you saw him live. We'd love to hear about it. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next time.